From our perspective, probably the most exciting thing I've ever been involved in my entire career. It is widely being recognised as one of the most important developments in human resource development and organisational development. You might recognise, as we go through the presentation, other terms that are coming into popular use. So for instance, people are talking about the importance of mindset, and there's a famous American called Dweck who's done a lot of pioneering work. Our work embraces that notion. People will often talk about positive psychology, they'll talk about resilience, they'll talk about grit. All of these concepts are beginning to be recognised as very important. And partway through the presentation, I'll explain why that is. But what's been happening is people have been recognising these concepts as important. They recognise what some very learned academics are saying about the subject, but are finding it often quite difficult to operationalise. Now, one of the benefits of working with Peter Clough is we've been able to get the best of both worlds, so to speak. I'm very much a practitioner, but I've worked with Peter for 25 years. Peter is probably one of the cleverest psychologists on the planet, and he's managed to structure and organise what this issue or what this topic is. He's been able to create a framework which we'll show you very, very shortly, which explains what mental toughness or mindset or resilience or grit it actually is. And we've been able to then turn it into something that practitioners can use, that leaders in organisations can use, and even individuals can use for themselves. And that obviously is a major benefit. It's nice to have some ideas that tell us how we might improve our performance, our well-being and our positive behaviour. But often the question is, well, exactly how do I do it? Well, we've got a framework which enables people to do exactly that. So we start firstly by defining mental toughness. And it's an important definition because it talks about mental toughness being a personality trait which determines in large part how people deal with challenge, stress and pressure, irrespective of prevailing circumstances. Now, you'll have noticed that some of the words in that brief definition are in italics. Those are key words. The first one is, we now know that mental toughness is a personality trait. It's one of many, but it's emerging as possibly the most important personality trait we've got in terms of dealing with challenge, stress and pressure and opportunity. We also know that it's a plastic personality trait. Now that simply means that we used to believe that personality was something that was comparatively fixed once we got to a certain age because that's how we'd learned to live our lives. We now know that all aspects of personality are plastic to some extent. And when we talk about plasticity, what we mean is that they're capable of change. Well, of course, that's very good news for all of us who are involved in training, development, organisational development, because if we can't change this, then what are we doing? But we now know that we can assess mental toughness, we can assess this personality trait, and we can develop it if we want to. The second phrase, or the pair of words that's in italics, is large part. Now this is where the significance of mental toughness comes through. We know that mental toughness accounts for 25% of the variation in an individual's performance. Now that's just spectacular. There are lots and lots of factors which impact on an individual's performance or attainment, not least ability. You can't perform unless you've actually got ability, but for one factor to account for 25% of the variation is extremely significant. It does mean that it's not the only factor, and we have to bear that in mind, but it is probably the most important factor in determining our ability to achieve things. And then the term irrespective of prevailing circumstances, well, that's simply addressing something that we always get asked. Whenever people talk about personality, particularly when they talk about behavioural aspects of personality, people will often say, well, I'm different at home than I am at work. Well, you might be in terms of behavioural aspects of personality, but in terms of mental toughness, No, you're not. You're exactly the same at home, at work, at play, irrespective of where you are. And that's also quite important to understand, because once you change your mental toughness, you change the way you respond to the world wherever you go. So we know it's universal and it's applicable in many walks of life. It's also important at an organizational level because we're beginning to talk about resilient organizations, and mental toughness embraces resilience. So what is it? Well, some people will react to the word toughness. They'll immediately see the word toughness and imagine that it's about being macho or domineering or aggressive. It isn't. When we talk about mental toughness, we're talking about toughness in the resilient sense of the word. So it's embracing ideas such as being the best that you can be. And the phrase that Peter Clough uses a lot, which I like, about being comfortable in your own skin. And it's essentially about accepting that life can be difficult, but it's full of opportunities as well as threats. So lots of bad things can happen to you, but if you've got a mentally tough mindset, you will often see the opportunity in those situations as well as the downside. So there's a very strong positive theme in mental toughness. Some people will talk about it's the key to happiness. We prefer the term contentment, and that's very much aligned with the ideas of people like Maslow, who talk about self-actualization. You're on a journey. You can experience a kind of happiness along that journey, but you don't necessarily achieve nirvana. But it's very much about achieving contentment. So is it important? Well, as I've just set out, it has a huge impact upon our individual and our organizational performance. It can explain up to 25% of the variation in attainment. It's also got a big impact on behavior. Mentally tough individuals, on the whole, are more engaged, more positive, and adopt a more can-do approach to things. So they're more likely to volunteer for things, even if they're busy. They're more likely to see the opportunities in things, even if they might be a little bit scared of it. So, a very simple example might be, you don't particularly have a head for heights, but a group of your friends want to go hill walking. You're not terribly keen to do that, but you'll have a go because you think you're going to get something out of it. And then increasingly, probably one of the most important aspects of mental toughness is it has a huge impact on your well-being. As I said before, it's about achieving greater contentment. We know that the mentally tough enjoy better stress management. There's the University of Basel in Switzerland has carried out about 10 formal pieces of research which have been published in the peer-reviewed journals, which show that the mentally tough deal better with anxiety, they deal better with stress. And curiously, they found that the mentally tough become even more mentally tough when exposed to stress and pressure. In other words, they're learning from their experiences. The mentally tough also report less bullying. So there are big, big benefits to looking at mental toughness. And that translates into a lot of important outcomes for individuals and organizations. So there are things like transition, and that's particularly significant in the world of education. All teachers will tell you that there is a big issue in transition between junior school and secondary school, and between secondary school and further and higher education. In fact, in higher education and further education, one of the biggest reasons for dropout from courses is the inability to deal with that transition. In organizations, managing change is the big issue for a lot of organizations. And we used to talk about change being constant. Well, change isn't just constant these days, it's frenetic. And if you have people who don't enjoy challenge and change, they just make that transition to whatever the new state is much more difficult. We're beginning to see the importance of resilience in leadership. We see a big impact in career management. There are several studies that show that the mentally tough are better at getting new jobs and progressing in their careers than the mentally sensitive. There's a big impact on employability. There's obviously a big impact on attainment, and the benefits just go on and on. Now, I've spoken about mental toughness, and I've used a phrase a couple of times, that's mental sensitivity. That's important to grasp. The opposite end of mental toughness is not mental weakness, it's mental sensitivity. It simply means that the mentally sensitive amongst us are people who allow the things that happen in life, the little setbacks, the big setbacks, to get to us, and we don't recover very well from them, whereas the mentally tough are perfectly capable of dealing with most of those setbacks. There are cases where the mentally tough don't prosper, and there are cases where the mentally sensitive can prosper. But on the whole, mentally tough individuals achieve more, are more positive, and enjoy better well-being than the mentally sensitive. Applications. Well, I guess by now, hopefully you'll be thinking, well, it's obviously got an application in leadership and management development, and it has. It's obviously got an application in staff development. When we look at organisational development and we look at the development of a resilient or a can-do organisation, people will often focus on the leadership of the organisation, and for good reasons, because that's the whole purpose of leadership. And leadership is about inspiring people to give their discretionary effort, to do that little bit extra. But you can only do that with people if you've built their mental toughness, their confidence and their resilience. So organisational development requires often a two-pronged attack. One is on with the leadership of the organisation, and the other is with the staff of the organisation. You rarely can do one without having to do the other. Massive application around the world now is recruiting young people from universities and colleges into the workplace. There is a global challenge about people being work ready and being tuned into what the world of work's like. The world of education study is very different to the world of work and does require a different kind of approach, and that approach very much tallies with what we describe as mental toughness. Of course, organisational development, and it has a big impact in recruitment and selection. The mental toughness questionnaire is a normative questionnaire, so it can be used in recruitment and selection, but bearing in mind that mental toughness can be developed, we don't always recommend that it's used for selection per se. In other words, if somebody isn't mentally tough enough, I'm not going to take them. We tend to recommend that people use it so that they understand more about the individual they're taking on. Because after all, if the individual has all the other qualities you're looking for, but there might be a question mark about the mental toughness, you know that's something you can do something about. So it shouldn't necessarily stop you recruiting that person, but it does help in understanding that individual when you come on board. In fact, we've got a big project running with a major Chinese organisation who use it in exactly that way. They don't use it as a filter to decide who they will take on and who they won't. They use it as a device to learn as much about that individual on day one so that they can optimise that person's contribution to what the organisation is trying to achieve. So let's now look a little bit more closely at what mental toughness is. Now, the work that Peter Clough has carried out has identified that mental toughness has 4 core components, and each of those core components has 2 subcomponents. Those components are called control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. Now, when you complete the questionnaire, we will be able to give you a score on a 1 to 10 STEM scale for each of those 4 factors. And we can combine those 4 factors to give an overall measure of mental toughness. Now, I believe there's about 35 or 36 people listening to this webinar. We could all complete the mental toughness questionnaire and all have an identical overall mental toughness score. But we might well have different profiles underneath that. So some of us will have a high degree of control, others will have a lesser degree of control, some will be very committed, some will be not so committed. It's that profile that matters. We are able to dig now a little bit more deeply into why people may not be contributing as much as they ought to be contributing, or as much as they can contribute. So I'm going to now go through those 4 components briefly. It's useful to think of these as aspects of mindset. That's a phrase we tend to use quite a lot when describing mental toughness, because mental toughness is essentially describing your mindset. So the first of the components is control. And this is where the sense of can-do sits. It really describes the extent to which you believe you can control some important aspects of your life. That you believe you can shape what happens to you and that you can manage your emotions when you're doing it. So we often talk about asking somebody to do something, even a busy person. I've got a job for you, it's got to be done for next Friday. Can you do it? Somebody with a high sense of control will often respond straight away by saying, leave it with me, I'll get on with it. What we know about them is they have a strong sense of self-belief. They are confident that they can do it, but they don't know whether they can do it. So that inner sense of self-belief drives them. On the other hand, you can go to another individual and you might get a different response. You might get something along the lines of, well, leave it with me and I'll think about it. Or I'll do it if, I'll do it but. And this is where listening carefully to language can give you a clue as to the mental toughness of the individual. Because as soon as people start using those conditional phrases, one of the things you know is that in their mind, i.e. their mindset, they're already thinking of why they might not be able to achieve what you're asking them to achieve. And if they're already thinking about it, that may well be conditioning what they actually do. So language is quite important when we look out for control. So there are 2 elements of control. One is life control and the other one's emotional control. When we look at life control, this is where this sense of can-do sits. People who've got a high level of life control simply believe they make a difference. They're very good at multitasking. And one of the reasons why they're very good at multitasking is they tend to be better than most at prioritizing, planning and organizing. So in that little description I gave you before, that little case study where I suggested that you give a busy person something to do and you would like it achieved by Friday, a positive person will have thought, well, I've got a bit of time on Wednesday, I know I can devote some time and attention to this, I will set that aside in my busy schedule to be able to handle this piece of work. So they're capable of thinking forward, they're capable of thinking about when they will be able to give whatever they have to do some attention. But of course that's supported by a mindset where they believe the cup is half full. Everything's possible. So things aren't possible and aren't impossible. And they will work hard to clear blockages. Now this phrase, work hard, interestingly appears everywhere. Now when we spoke earlier about one of the big benefits of developing mental toughness is that people perform better, well, what we see is that mentally tough individuals don't just work smart, they also work hard and enjoy it. So that's quite a crucial element here. So this is sort of linking back to contentment, happiness, and as Confucius once said, find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, this seems to be an underpinning mindset in life control. And people with a high level of life control understand that problems will arise, problems exist, and They're just there to be handled in the normal course of events. Now, at the end of the section on the 4 C's, we will just dwell for a moment about, are there potential downsides in having a high level of life control? And of course there are. When we look at emotional control, these are people who can manage their emotional responses to situations. So even if the world is falling down around their ears, they're able to mask their emotions. They're able to put a brave face on things. And of course, particularly for leadership, that's a very important quality. But it's also an important quality within a workforce. To drop mood or to be miserable can be quite infectious. Stay with me for a moment. Okay, and they can also be quite difficult to provoke or annoy. They deal well with difficult people, and they master their anxiety and maintain their points. Interestingly, they also deal well with bullying behaviour. If you think about what a bully does, a bully will often try to provoke an individual in order to get a response, and once they've got a response, they know they can exploit that. If you've got a high level of emotional control, you never give the bully the signals that they're getting to you. So, emotional control is the second component of control. The second of the 4 C's is commitment. And this corresponds very much to what in the States people are called grit. It describes the extent to which you are goal orientated. So when you're asked to do something, do you set goals and targets for yourself? So if somebody asks you to do a piece of work this week, but doesn't actually tell you when it's got to be delivered, do you in your own mind say, okay, I'll do it, and I'm going to finish it for Thursday? So that's one element of commitment. The second element is, do you then do whatever you can to deliver that promise? And so that corresponds very closely with a behavioural aspect of personality, conscientiousness. Because the difference between conscientiousness and commitment is, in conscientiousness, people will often give you the goal or a target. This is assessing whether you are naturally inclined to set goals and targets, particularly for yourself. So the promises can be made to others or to yourself. So in the world of education, it might be, I'm going off to university and I want to get a good degree. I want to get at least a 2-1. I'm setting that goal or a target for myself. And when you think about most students don't get given their goals and targets. They have to work them out for themselves. But the same is true in a workforce. You know, you can have a whole range of employees, some of whom will decide to do the minimum, some of whom will be quite aspirational. So when asked to do something by a certain time and date, do you instinctively think, I'll go for that and I'll do what it takes? Or if you've got a low level of commitment, you might say, I'll never manage that. I'll look stupid if I fail. So what do people with a high level of commitment typically look like? Well, their mindset is to translate whatever they have to do into goals and targets, because they become pictures of success. So in their minds, if I've decided to accept a task, and I'm going to, in my mind, decide to do it by the end of play on Friday, if I achieve that, I know I've achieved, and I get a sense of satisfaction from that. I get a sense of contentment from that. I don't need other people to tell me that I've been successful. I've put in my head a little process to determine that for myself. So people who have got low level of commitment, not surprisingly, will often avoid goals and targets as much as possible. So people with a high level of commitment will like tests. they'll like assignments, they'll like working on project-based activity, and they'll like examinations. And they'll set targets for themselves, things like personal bests. So this is an aspect of development in the world of sport that is very widely used. Athletes will often talk about not necessarily winning a gold medal, they'd all love to do that, but most athletes are satisfied with achieving and bettering the personal bests. I'm a little bit like that myself. I have a rowing machine at home, and it's quite a sophisticated rowing machine. It's got a set of dials that tell me how far out of road if I've been on real water. And I tend to set targets for myself. So I know if I've rowed 7,500 meters last week, I try to row another 50 meters this week. I just push myself a little bit more. So this is what commitment entails. Again, in order to be highly committed, you need to have an attitude of mind that you're prepared to work hard and go for it. And you've got to be excited by the idea of measures, goals and targets. Now, when you think about this particular element, I often think about performance appraisal systems. A lot of performance appraisal systems are management by objective performance management systems. If this is true, and it is, then the belief that you motivate people by telling them clearly what's expected from them only works with some people. It intimidates others. Now, we're not arguing that performance management isn't a good thing to do. We actually believe it is. But what you need to do is identify the people who are intimidated by the process and show them how to optimize that. A lot of performance management systems fail simply because people don't do that. Now, one of the phrases we used earlier was resilience. And there is a close and important connection between resilience and mental toughness. Resilience is simply the ability or the quality that enables you to respond to an adverse situation, to a setback. And if you pick yourself up when something's gone wrong, dust yourself off and carry on going, then people will describe you as resilient. But actually, there's no requirement for you to enjoy or like being resilient. Now, interestingly, in the 1980s, a researcher in California called Cabasa, who was working with senior managers in organizations in Silicon Valley, she had a very simple hypothesis where she thought that the higher up an organization a person went, the more resilient they were likely to be, and that resilience was probably the driver to get them up the organization. And that's pretty much what she found. But then she found something else that was coming into play. She found that the higher up the organization, something else was happening. When she came across ambitious senior and middle managers, she found that not only were they more resilient, but they would often put their resilience deliberately into play. In other words, I'll give you a simple example. If you had an ambitious manager and that manager had an option of managing one of two departments. Department A was a dream department. Everybody got on well with each other, the processes were perfect, and it was achieving its goals and outcomes, and all its customers were perfectly happy. Department B was a total mess. Everybody was at each other's throats, the processes were a mess, and the customers were complaining endlessly. If you went to an ambitious manager and gave them the option of running those two departments, the vast majority would opt for Department B, even though that carried a great deal more risk to their careers and perhaps to their lives. So what she began to understand was that within us there was another quality. There was a desire sometimes to respond to the challenges that we find around us. And of course, the challenges by their very nature carry a lot more risk. So mental toughness embraces resilience, but it's wider than resilience. And that's important because resilience is a comparatively narrow concept. Mental toughness is a broader, all-embracing concept. So we're just going to look now a little bit more closely at challenge. What Peter Clough did to complete the mental toughness model is he added the notion of confidence. So when Cabasa was talking about challenge, she was talking about it as a source of drive for individuals. And it really describes the extent to which you see challenges, adversity, variety, change as opportunities or as threats. Now, all four components of mental toughness are really equally important because they're all part of this concept of mental toughness. Personally, I find that this particular component, challenge, is very intriguing and very enlightening. It's probably the area of people development that has been least explored. So when you look at, if you were to go to an individual or even to an organization and say, right, we've got to do something new, we've got to change tack, we've got to throw away everything that we've been doing up to now and do something completely different in the future, you're going to get one of two responses. You're either going to get people saying, great, I'm really looking forward to that, I'm going to learn something from that. Or you're going to say, oh no, I'm comfortable with what I've always been doing, I don't want to experience that. People who've got a high level of challenge like challenge and stretching themselves. They can be easily bored because one of the things they like is they like the thrill of the challenge. We work with a very clever neuropsychologist called Professor Paul Brown. He suggests there may even be a thrill in doing this. You can understand that. That some people will get a buzz out of doing new things and challenging themselves and challenging people around them. So sometimes they may even provoke change. And again, they work hard and they work smart, but they are risk orientated. They're prepared to push themselves, they're prepared to challenge themselves, they're prepared to question the status quo. And quite interestingly, they're always the first to volunteer for a new experience. They love getting into something new. And one of the reasons why they like doing all of this is they see learning in every outcome or opportunity. So even though they are prepared to take on more risk, they're prepared to stretch themselves, if things go wrong, they don't necessarily see that as the end of the story. They see learning in every opportunity. So somebody who's got a high level of challenge, if something's gone wrong, they're more likely to say, that went wrong, that didn't go so well, but I've learned something from that. I now know how to do it better next time. I'm going to look for another opportunity to test out what I now know. Whereas somebody with a low level of challenge is more likely to say something along the lines of, that didn't work, I'm never doing that again. So challenge is a very important positive quality. This is where we see ideas from the world of positive psychology beginning to build on a neutral quality such as resilience. So this is about beginning to see life in a positive way, life in terms of opportunities, and not minding that you might get a few bruises along the way. The component that Peter Clough added was confidence. Now, just giving you a tiny bit of background, because I know that South Africa is a rugby playing country. He was particularly interested in the performance of place kickers. And we all know that place kickers are probably, in terms of points, the most valuable person in a rugby union team. They often score more points than the rest of the team put together. In fact, the purpose of the rest of the team is often to get the place kicker into a position where he can convert the advantage that the team has gained into points. But of course, you can have a team that outplays the other team totally, but the place kicker might have an off day. But if you look at what a place kicker does, actually the activity of a place kicker, swinging a boot at a stationary ball and aiming it at quite a wide goal, is not that difficult. And yet, in the pressure of a big game, things will often go wrong. And we see place kickers missing a kick, and then curiously, and sometimes not surprisingly, missing the next 2 or 3 kicks. And what Peter Clough was trying to do was to explain why place kickers might do that. Because once the place kicker gets into the zone, the ball goes over the posts, over the bar and between the posts routinely. And when the place kicker's on form, it makes such a huge difference to the team. So he looked at control, that didn't explain it. Looked at commitment, that didn't explain it. Looked at challenge, that didn't explain it. And he said, well, perhaps the missing link is confidence. And that's where I became engaged with Peter for 8 years. We explored this, we researched it until Peter was comfortable that confidence was indeed the missing link in this notion of mental toughness. This is where self-belief sits. It really explains the extent to which you believe you have the ability to deal with what will face you and the inner strength to stand your ground when needed. So we know that there are 2 components to confidence. One is having confidence in your abilities, and the other one is interpersonal confidence. So, looking at those 2 elements a little bit more closely, people with a high level of confidence and abilities don't need other people to tell them they can do it, or they don't need people to encourage them. They're happy to engage in discussions, to contribute their ideas, even if it takes them into the unknown. Now, we're beginning to pick up a lot of interest from a lot of organisations about developing innovation. We believe that this is a significant contribution to improving innovation in organisations. They can believe they're right, so they have a very strong sense of belief. The problem can be, and this is a clue to perhaps one of the kind of potential downsides for somebody who's got a high level of confidence and abilities, they can believe they're right even when they're wrong. And they have little or no need for external validation. Now here, with confidence and abilities, there is a potential confound sometimes. There are people with a lot of ability who don't believe they're able, and so they don't achieve what they can do, and they don't optimize their contribution to organizations. And that, of course, has a big impact on performance and on innovation. And you can actually have people with moderate amounts of ability who have got a lot of confidence in even those moderate amounts, and they achieve a lot. So this is one of the explanations as to why sometimes very able people don't achieve as much as they should. It's simply their mindset. They're not using their ability. They don't believe they have as much ability as they actually do possess. The other component is interpersonal confidence. This is very much about being prepared to influence other people as much as they influence you. So people with a high level of interpersonal confidence will argue their corner, and especially the people who are right. And sometimes they'll get their own way. They may even have the gift of the gab. They may well have developed behaviours which will allow them to out-argue other people. They don't allow other people to orally dominate them, in other words, shout them down or talk them down. They will have a go and they'll enter conversations because simply they've got the confidence that they can deal with the conversation. And interestingly, they will often provide full responses to questions. So people with low levels of interpersonal confidence are those, and you'll recognize them, who, when you ask them something, they'll give you the absolute minimum. It'll be yes, no, or maybe, or you might even get a grunt. People who've got a high level of interpersonal confidence, if you ask them or engage them in a conversation, you'll start getting a response from them, and then 15 minutes later you're trying to stop them. But they give you a very full response. So, if we were to summarize this, and from the aspect of mindset, we could imagine that if we look at the 4 C's, these are the kind of thoughts that are running through somebody's head. So in terms of control, it will be, I really believe I can do it. I can keep my emotions in check when doing it. I can manage my emotions. In terms of commitment, I promise to do it, and I'll do what it takes to deliver it. In terms of challenge, I'm happy to stretch myself. I'm prepared to take some risks. I'm motivated to do that. And if I make mistakes, I know I'm going to learn from those too. In terms of confidence, I believe I have the ability to do it. And if I haven't, I know that I can go and acquire that ability. And I can stand my ground and persuade and influence others if I need to. So together, that gives you a picture of a mentally tough individual. Now, true mentally tough individuals are comparatively rare. Only about 1/6 of all of us, of the population on the planet, can describe themselves as mentally tough. 2/3 a balance between mental toughness and mental sensitivity, and about 1/6 of people would be described as mentally sensitive. And just take a step back from a moment. Why is this important? Well, if you look at human resource development and organizational development, for the past 60 or 70 years, it's been preoccupied by behavior. We know that personality has broadly 3 components. It's got, the first of those is how we act, and that's about behavior. So we create behavioral frameworks. We tend to assess people in terms of their behavior. And particularly when we look at organizational or people development, we try to show people other, perhaps more productive behaviors and either hope or expect them to adopt them. But our track record generally with that is not that great. People tend to revert to previous behaviors. The second aspect of personality is how we feel. And that's very much about emotions and feelings. And again, there's a very good ability to assess those, and there's quite a lot of work that can be done about that, showing people how to respond differently to situations. That's got a big part to play in counselling, for instance. Now, both when we look at behavioural aspects of personality and the emotional aspects of personality, we've been very comfortable with that because when we look at behaviours, we can see and describe behaviours quite accurately. When we talk about emotions, we can see and describe those quite accurately. We can do that to ourselves. I can explain my behaviour, I can explain my emotions. When we get to the third component of personality, it's a little bit different. And that's the component which looks at how we think. Now, that's considerably more challenging. We can see behaviour, we can observe people's feelings and emotions, we can get them to describe it, but it's very hard to actually see inside somebody's head. And even when it's ourselves, we will often know that something's gone wrong and for some reason we've not been able to deal with it, but we can't pinpoint why. Mental toughness and mindset is all about understanding how we think. And its significance, which loops back to the second slide that I put up, is that how we think determines to a large extent how we behave and how we feel. So if you really want to make a difference to behavior and to feelings, you've also got to be able to assess and develop the mindsets of individuals and organizations. This is where the mental toughness concept and other work like it is beginning to complete the picture, or certainly move us on to the next level of people development. There may well be other things that come up in the future, but it does explain why perhaps we're not always as effective at changing individuals or assessing individuals as we could be. So how does it fit into current thinking? Well, in the last 15 years, we've seen a lot of work beginning to come. We're beginning to see a lot of new phrases. Perhaps in North America, the big leaders are Carol Dweck. She coined the phrase mindset, and it's a very good description of mindset. She talks about a growth and a fixed mindset, which correlates almost perfectly with our ideas of mental toughness and mental sensitivity. Martin Seligman, who's sometimes called the father of positive psychology, he has begun to explain what optimism is. But of course, optimism in our model is captured by challenge and confidence. Then Paul Tough, who brings a completely different perspective, but a very similar perspective, he talks about the importance of developing this as early as possible. And he's actually focusing on young people between the ages of 0 and 4. He points out that that's probably where most of our initial development of what we now call mental toughness happens. And then when you look at things like the work of people like Jim Collins, in the book Good to Great, he talks about the 8 or 9 things that all great companies do. One of them is hardiness. And hardiness, if you read the chapter, is exactly what I've just described to you as mental toughness. So we know that these factors are important. And Warwick Bennis has also begun to incorporate ideas of resilience into his work on leadership. So what we're doing now with mental toughness fits very well, and what we're generally being recognized as doing is beginning to pull all of these ideas and put them all into one very accessible framework, which is what the 4 C's is. Can you develop mental toughness? Yeah, you can, because the mental toughness model itself is a framework which enables you to understand what's going on. It also enables you to diagnose to a significant level of detail what might be the issue for individuals and for groups and organizations. Well, once you understand what that might be, you can then direct interventions better. The interesting thing about the interventions is, I'd say 90% of the interventions are interventions that people already use, but don't use them effectively or don't know why they work. And then finally, you're able to evaluate more effectively whether you've changed something. And that's where the mental toughness questionnaire comes in. Can you develop mental toughness? Well, you can. And we know that there are 6 broad approaches to developing mental toughness. One is to develop positive thinking, to develop a more positive frame of mind in individuals and organizations. And if you were to do a search on Google, positive thinking tools and techniques, you'll get hundreds. Problem is that some of them work, some of them don't. Some of them work, but they don't work on all people. So you need to understand them a little bit better. But again, that's where the model comes in. The framework gives you some understanding about why a particular technique might work with an individual and why it might not. Visualization is the second area for developing mental toughness. We don't have to teach anybody to visualize. What this is about is showing people how to use the inside of your head more effectively, particularly for learning. It's the best place for you to learn, and it's the best place for you to practice things. The third area is anxiety control, and this is what you would call the traditional stress management tools and techniques. And they are important and they do work. They're things like muscular relaxation, controlled breathing, and so on. The fourth area is the area that receives probably the least attention. When I spoke about most people know 90% of the tools and techniques, this is the area where they know very few of the tools and techniques. Attentional control is about improving people's ability to focus, their ability to focus longer, and there are big paybacks for that. The average attention span of an individual these days is assessed at around 8 minutes. We know that we can improve people's attention span to anything between 45 and 90 minutes. So when you think about doing a piece of work, any intellectual activity, whether it's listening to this, whether it's writing a report, whether it's reading something that you need to do, then if you can improve your attention span, if you can improve your ability to focus, that becomes a much easier, much more productive, and much less stressful activity. In our work, that's probably the most important, or the area which contributes most to people well-being. The fifth area of mental toughness development is goal setting. We all know how to set SMART goals, we all learn about how to balance goals, but it appears that the big missing ingredient is how to achieve big goals. And this is all about, can you set milestones, can you break goals into their component parts, can you organise things? And this takes you into simple things that we all know about, but we don't often use, things like Gantt charts and setting milestones. And then, interestingly, the mental toughness questionnaire itself is an effective intervention. What we find is when people have completed the questionnaire, they often, a light bulb goes on in their head. They often suddenly understand something about themselves, so self-awareness is beginning to develop, and they begin to understand why they have had difficulty in dealing with or achieving some things. And once they understand that, they're quite often able to work out strategies and tactics for themselves. They don't actually need a further intervention. But to introduce interventions is beneficial for everyone anyway. So we know that mental toughness development can take place. And in fact, if you were to talk to most sports coaches, and certainly sports coaches in South Africa, they will say, we've been doing this for years. What's so special about it? One of the problems in the past has been that it has been seen as a very sport-specific thing. What we've done is been able to say, well, what it is, and we've been able to generalise it and make it accessible to everybody. So, can you use the measure, the mental toughness questionnaire? It's very easy to use. It's a 48-item questionnaire. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. It's reliable and valid. So these are technical terms. In terms of its reliability and validity, it's up there with the very best psychometric tests in the world. Very short training period. There are 5 reports that are generated, 1 for the individual, 2 for a manager or a coach. There is a distance travelled report where if you can get people to complete the questionnaire before and after an activity, it will compare the results. And then in organisational development settings, there's a group report. So you're able to, if you tested the top 100 managers in an organisation, you can then create a group profile for those managers to see what the overall mental toughness of the group looks like. So you can attend to both the individuals and the group. So the questionnaire and the database that goes behind it has been deliberately designed less to be a psychometric test, much more to be a human resource development tool. And it's available in something like 17 or 18 languages now, including Arabic and Chinese. So the benefits of looking at mental toughness are it really helps us to understand something about people which is fundamental to their performance and well-being. That is how their mind works. It's a very easy to understand framework, and it applies to all soft skills development. You can incorporate it into leadership development, into presentation skills, into communication skills, into time management programs. All of those so-called soft skills elements really are based upon an individual's mindset as well as their behaviours. And of course we have the ability through the questionnaire to evaluate reliably what you're doing with your people. At the end of the day, mental toughness assesses mindset. It's an enabler which allows you to develop people individually and in organisations. So, back to you, Laura. I think there's a bit of time left for people to ask questions. I'm very happy to do that.
Thanks, Doug. Very informative. I really appreciate your time. We have got a couple of questions that have come through. First of all, the age range of this tool. When can it be, at what age can it be applied to?
Well, the core norm group is a working age norm group, so that's ages 17 to 65, but actually we have done equivalency studies which show that it can be used from around age 10, and there's probably no upper limit.
Great. Now I hope I'm going to get the next question right from Darren. She said, interesting to consider the cultural understanding of the 4 C's, but not sure if having mental toughness is aspirational across diversity. Darren, I might need you to give us a bit more information on that one.
Right, well, I mean, that's broadly a question about, maybe perhaps about cultural differences. If I've got that wrong, apologies. Because we've now worked in 80 countries, we do see cultural differences around the world, but we also have identified that there is a global norm. The reality is we work in a global economy. Diversity is really important. We do not argue at any time that everybody should be mentally tough. The mentally sensitive are actually important in our lives. They bring something that the mentally tough don't do. They make us aware about the things that make them sensitive. Your questioner is absolutely right. We mustn't sort of go down a track where we say mental toughness is the be-all and end-all of everything. What we do know is that the mentally tough do achieve more. They get, excuse the phrase, but they do tend to get a better deal in life. The studies will show that they are happier, they get better incomes, they progress better with their careers. But that's almost a statistical response. You can get mentally tough individuals who don't do all of this, and you can get mentally sensitive individuals who achieve as much as mentally tough individuals do. It's just that there are far fewer of them, and there do appear to be some benefits in looking at mental toughness. Now, when we talk about developing mental toughness, it's quite useful to consider that we don't actually have to become more mentally tough. We do know that you can show people, mentally sensitive people, what a mentally tough person does. And if they will adopt some of those behaviours, they do get some of the benefits of that would accrue to a mentally tough individual. So we're not arguing that the whole world should become mentally tough. It would be a very one-dimensional world, and we'd lose a lot of richness. What we also, though, see is some really important differences around the world. So, for instance, when we go to China, we see different mental toughness profiles to those that we see in the West. When we go to the Middle East, we see very different profiles again. But they all correlate with what's happening and sort of the desired outcomes and objectives in those areas. So, for instance, the data we've got in China shows that their commitment score are astonishingly high. So they will work hard and achieve. Their challenge scores, which correlates with innovation, are comparatively low. And that is one of the desires in the Chinese economy. When we go to the Middle East, generally commitment scores are lower than they are in the West. And what we see in the Middle East is there is now a desire to develop that aspect of our personality so that people in the Middle East can compete or deal on an equal footing with people in the West who've got some of these qualities in abundance. It's a really interesting area. What we're not proposing is that everybody should become more mentally tough, and we're not proposing that we should create a one-dimensional society.
Thanks, Doug. Well, feedback from Darren was that was very well answered, so thank you for that. We did get that right. A couple of people have asked around cost, which we will address. There's 2 options. You can either outsource the MTQ assessment, in which case we would run the the program for you and provide you with feedback. Or alternatively, if you wanted to bring it in-house, there's a once-off cost and end-user license. You get trained up on the system, and then obviously there are credits which you would purchase ahead of time, which would enable you to analyze the data of your assessments. But that we will email everyone who's attended the webinar. One other question was, how long does it take to get the MTQ results back? Doug?
That's pretty instant. It's if you're sat in front of your computer and somebody's completed it on your computer, you're probably talking about seconds.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this very informative session, Doug. Really appreciate it. And I apologize for getting you out of bed early this morning. I'd forgotten that the UK is 2 hours behind us. Thank you very much. For those that have attended, we will be in contact with you with a link for you to go through the MTQ assessment yourself. Once you've completed it, we will then email through your results, and we can organize a personal session with you to give you your feedback over Skype or in person. Thanks, everyone. Any questions, please don't hesitate to drop us a mail. Anything else from your side, Doug?
No, thank you for everyone for listening. I hope you're still there. You've done very well. Your attentional control must be excellent.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye.